Wren Calloway was 21 years old and had been sleeping in the cab of her truck for 9 days straight, parked behind a closed-down carpet warehouse off Route 19 in Elk View, West Virginia. The warehouse lot had no security cameras. The dumpster behind the loading dock blocked the view from the road, and nobody driving past at night would see a girl curled up under a moving blanket with her boots on. She had $22 in her pocket and a border collie mix in the passenger seat who had appeared 6 days earlier at a gas station on Route 60 near Gauley Bridge. He had attached himself to her life with the quiet, absolute certainty of a dog who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the human to catch up. If you're new here, this is Pet Trail Stories, and every week we follow Wren and her animals as she finds forgotten places that nobody else wants and turns them into something worth having. If that sounds like your kind of story, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single one. The dog had been standing at the edge of the gas station parking lot when Wren pulled in to use the restroom. He was about 38 pounds, with a coat that was mostly black across the back and shoulders, but broke into irregular patches of white on the chest and forelegs. It looked as though someone had dipped him halfway into a bucket of snow and pulled him out before it took completely. His left ear stood straight up, his right ear folded forward at the tip, giving him the permanent expression of a dog who had just heard something interesting and was deciding whether to investigate or file it away for later. His eyes were different colors. The left one a pale ice blue, almost silver in certain light, the right one a warm amber brown. The combined effect was like being studied by two different animals at once. He had a narrow white blaze running from between his eyes to the tip of his nose. His tail was long and feathered and carried low, sweeping side to side in a slow, measured wag that suggested approval, but not enthusiasm. Lean, but not thin. Clean, but not groomed. He stood with the alert posture of a working dog who had lost his work, but not the instinct for it. He watched Wren walk from the truck to the restroom and back. When she opened the driver's door, he trotted across the lot, jumped into the cab through the open passenger door, circled once on the seat and lay down with his chin on the armrest and his mismatched eyes on the road ahead. He simply settled in, as though this had been the plan all along, and she was running 6 days late. Wren named him Ledger. The name came from the way he tracked the landscape through the windshield, noting each bend in the road, each bridge, each change in the tree line. He filed it all away with the methodical patience of a dog who believed that information had value and none of it should be wasted. He had a herding instinct that expressed itself in small ways. If Wren walked too close to the edge of a road, he pressed his shoulder against her calf and guided her toward the center. If she left something on the tailgate, he nosed it back toward the truck bed. Elk View sat in the Elk River Valley about 12 miles east of Charleston, in Kanawha County. A town of about 1,100 people stretched along Route 119 where the road followed the river between steep, wooded ridges. The valley was barely wide enough for the road, the river, and a thin strip of buildings pressed between them. A dollar store, a volunteer fire department, a church of God with a gravel lot. A handful of houses with porches that looked out at the ridge across the water. The kind of town that had been built to serve the timber industry and the coal camps, and had kept on existing after both of them left. Wren had ended up here by following Route 60 east from Huntington through the coal country of Fayette County, past the New River Gorge, then north on Route 19 to where it joined Route 119 along the Elk River. The mountains in this part of West Virginia were not the sharp peaks of postcards. They were long, rounded ridges covered in hardwood forest, oak, hickory, poplar, and maple. The ridges rose steeply from the valley floors and blocked the sky on both sides. Driving through them felt like moving through a green hallway with no end. She met Earl Skaggs on her second morning in Elk View. Earl was 74, a retired coal equipment mechanic who ran a small engine repair shop in a cinder-block building behind his house off Route 119. He had a thick chest, short, bowed legs, and hands permanently darkened in the creases from 40 years of gear oil and hydraulic fluid. Brown canvas pants every day, a gray thermal undershirt, a quilted vest with a steel chainsaw patch on the breast. He had a habit of answering questions by first repeating the question back to himself, as though he needed to hear it in his own voice before he could trust it enough to respond. He noticed Wren's truck because he walked his Beagle past the carpet warehouse every morning at 6:15, and on the second morning, the border collie in the passenger seat stared at the Beagle with the intensity of a dog cataloging a new entry. Earl tapped on the window. "That your dog or his truck?" he asked. "Both now," Wren said. Earl looked at the moving blanket and the camp stove and the gallon jug of water behind the seat. He repeated something to himself under his breath, the way he always did, and then he said she ought to drive up the Elk River about 4 miles to a place called Clendenin. There was a building up there that the county had been trying to get rid of for 8 years. A sawmill. Bowman's Mill. Horace Bowman built it in 1903. Last operated in 1971. County seized it in 2018 for back taxes and put it on the books for $10, and nobody's touched it because the blade housing is the size of a truck, and people figure if the building hasn't fallen down by now, it's about to. "Is it about to?" Wren asked. "Horace Bowman built that mill from chestnut timbers he cut himself," Earl said. "American chestnut before the blight took them all. That mill will be standing when this road is gone." Clendenin was 4 miles north on Route 119, a town of about 900 people at the confluence of the Elk River and Big Sandy Creek. The ridges pulled back here enough to let in sky, and the town had arranged itself along both sides of the river with a bridge connecting Main Street to the residential side. The sawmill was on the east bank, a quarter-mile south of the bridge, set back from the road on a flat piece of bottomland between the river and the ridge. Wren saw it from the road. The building was a timber frame structure 60 feet long by 30 feet wide, with a shallow pitched gable roof covered in standing seam metal that had rusted from silver to a deep reddish brown. The walls were vertical board chestnut, the same silver gray as old bone, with gaps between the boards where the wood had shrunk over 123 years. A lean-to shed extended from the north end, its roof sagging but intact, sheltering what had once been a log deck where timber was staged before milling. The main door was a sliding barn door on an iron track, 10 feet wide and 12 feet tall, standing half open and canted on its track like a jaw that had been trying to speak for decades and had frozen mid-sentence. Ledger stood up in the passenger seat. His ears rotated forward, both of them, even the folded one, and he pressed his nose to the window glass, and his breath fogged a circle on it, and through the fog, his mismatched eyes locked onto the building with the fixed attention of a dog who had identified something that required immediate investigation. His tail began its slow, measured sweep. He looked at Wren. He looked at the building. The message did not require translation. Wren drove to the Kanawha County Courthouse in Charleston, 16 miles south on Route 119. The tax clerk pulled the record from a filing cabinet and spread it on the counter. Lot 42E, River Road, Clendenin District. Structure, sawmill, circa 1903, timber frame on stone foundation. Assessed value, $0. Tax status, forfeited, 2018. Sale price, $10. The clerk was a woman named Donna who had reading glasses on a beaded chain and a Mountaineer's coffee mug and the weary expression of someone who had explained county tax policy for 27 years. She looked at Wren's driver's license. "You know what's in that building, right?" she said. "A sawmill," Wren said. "A sawmill with a 54-inch circular blade that weighs about 600 pounds and a blade housing the size of a Buick," Donna said. County tried to have it removed in 2019. The scrap crew said they'd need a crane. Nobody's paid for a crane. The building comes with the blade. She stamped the deed. "Congratulations. You now own the heaviest thing in Clendenin." Wren signed the paperwork, paid the $10. She now had $12 in her pocket and a 123-year-old sawmill with a 600-pound blade. She drove back to Clendenin and parked on the gravel apron in front of the mill. Ledger jumped down from the cab before she had the engine off and trotted to the sliding door, his nose working, his ears in their permanent asymmetry, one up, one folded, processing information from inside the building. He stepped inside. The interior of the sawmill was a single, open room, the full 60 feet by 30 feet, with the roof timbers visible overhead. Massive chestnut beams, 8 inches by 10 inches, spanning the width of the building. They were supported by 4 chestnut posts down the center line, each one a full 12 inches square. The floor was poured concrete in the milling area and heavy plank decking in the staging area. All of it covered in a layer of sawdust so thick and compacted that it had taken on the consistency of felt. The air smelled like old wood and iron and machine oil, the permanent smell of a place where trees had been turned into lumber for 68 years. The saw rig dominated the center of the room. A massive cast-iron table, 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, sat on a concrete pad with anchor bolts the diameter of a man's thumb. Rising from the table was the blade housing. A cast-iron shroud, curved and heavy, bolted together with hex head bolts that had rusted into a single mass with the housing itself. Inside the shroud, visible through an inspection port the size of a dinner plate, was the blade. 54 inches across, teeth worn to nubs, its steel surface covered in a patina of rust that was the deep burnt orange of autumn oak leaves. The blade had not moved since 1971. The rust had locked it to the arbor shaft with the permanent grip of metal bonding to metal over decades of stillness. A belt drive system ran from the saw arbor to a line shaft along the south wall, connected by flat leather belts now cracked and hanging loose. The motor was a Westinghouse electric that had replaced the original steam engine sometime in the 1940s. 25 horsepower, 3-phase, 1,750 revolutions per minute. Its nameplate was still legible under the dust. Sawdust had filled every horizontal surface in the building, a fine, pale sediment that recorded the last 55 years of settling like geological strata in miniature. Ledger worked the room methodically. He moved along the walls first, nose to the floor, then wove between the machinery. He investigated the saw table, the belt guards, the motor housing. He paused at the concrete pad beneath the saw rig and lowered his head. His right ear, the folded one, came forward until both ears were pointing at the floor. It was the first time Wren had seen them match. He began to paw at the sawdust beside the blade housing, digging with short, precise strokes, his nails scraping against something that was not concrete and not wood. He dug faster. He whined, a single, high, focused note, the sound of a dog who had found what he was looking for and needed a human with hands. Wren knelt beside him. Under 3 inches of compacted sawdust, wedged between the base of the blade housing and the concrete pad, was a leather satchel. Dark brown, nearly black with age, about 14 inches long and 10 inches wide, with a brass buckle that had turned green. The leather was cracked but intact, the stitching still holding. Heavy saddle leather built for decades of use. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and there's a lot more to uncover inside this satchel. Wren unbuckled the satchel with fingers that had gone careful and slow. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth folded with deliberate precision, she found 4 items. The first was a bundle of documents, heavy cream-colored paper printed with the ornate borders and dense legal language of another century. Land deeds. 7 of them, each bearing the name Horace W. Bowman, and describing a parcel of land in Kanawha County by meets and bounds. Each deed was dated between 1905 and 1919. Each described a different parcel of forest land on the ridges surrounding Clendenin. The second item was a hand-drawn map on linen paper, folded into quarters, showing the Elk River Valley from Clendenin south to the Kanawha County line. On the map, 7 parcels were outlined in ink and labeled with acreage: 40, 55, 30, 80, 35, 45, and 60 acres. Total, 345 acres of forest land on the ridges above the Elk River. The parcels were contiguous, acquired piece by piece over 14 years by a sawmill owner who understood that the man who owned the trees owned the future. The third item was a leather pouch, drawstring closure containing 23 silver dollars. Morgan dollars, heavy in the hand, the dates ranging from 1878 to 1901. They had the dull, warm gray of silver that has been handled often and stored well. The fourth item was a small leather-bound notebook, 4 inches by 6 inches, with HWB stamped on the cover. Inside, in a careful, angular hand, were entries documenting the timber operations of Bowman's mill from 1903 to 1941, board feet cut, species processed, prices paid. Poplar at $14 per 1,000 board feet, oak at $18, cherry at $22, chestnut at $20 until the blight killed the last of them in 1935, and the entries stopped. The notebook was a ledger of the forest, written by a man who kept track because keeping track was how you kept honest. Wren sat on the sawdust-covered floor with the contents of the satchel spread around her. Ledger lay beside her with his chin on her knee, both eyes watching her face. She understood that Horace Bowman had hidden the most important things he owned in the one place nobody would think to look, under the blade that had built his fortune. He had tucked his deeds and his silver and his records beneath 600 pounds of cast iron. The sawdust covered the hiding place like snow covering a grave. The notebook's last entry was dated November 1941. Horace Bowman had died in 1943. The satchel had outlasted him. She needed someone who understood old deeds and old land. Earl Skaggs, when she told him what she had found, did what Earl always did, repeated the key facts to himself, nodded twice, and said he knew a man. Clyde Farley, 67, a semi-retired land surveyor and title researcher who worked out of a 2-room office above a hardware store in Clendenin. Clyde had been researching property records in Kanawha County for 35 years and could trace a chain of title back to the original Virginia land grants the way other people trace family trees. Clyde came to the mill the next morning. He was a tall, angular man with wire-rimmed glasses and a canvas field vest with 11 pockets, each one containing a specific tool or reference. He examined the deeds one by one, holding each up to the light from the doorway, his lips moving over the metes and bounds language with the practiced fluency of someone who spoke that dialect natively. These are valid conveyances, Clyde said. He set the last deed down on the saw table. Recorded in the Kanawha County Clerk's office between 1905 and 1919. The paper stock is correct. The tax stamps are correct. The notary seals are consistent with the period. He unfolded the linen map and compared it to his county plat. The 7 parcels were all on the ridgeline east of the Elk River, between Clendenin and the community of Pinch. Steep terrain, mostly second-growth hardwood. The question is whether these deeds were ever transferred out of Bowman's name. If the chain of title dead ends at Horace Bowman, you may have a claim through the tax sale. It's not simple, but it's there. Clyde spent 3 days at the county clerk's office pulling records. None of the 7 parcels had been transferred, sold, or claimed since Horace Bowman's death in 1943. His only son, Harold, had been killed in France in 1944. His wife Edna had died in 1952 without filing probate. The parcels had sat in the records for 83 years. Assessed, untaxed, unclaimed. Clyde filed a quiet title action on Wren's behalf. The filing fee was $340. The court granted the quiet title 6 weeks later. The land was hers. 345 acres of mountain forest above the Elk River. She contacted a licensed timber appraiser named Roy Blankenship through Clyde's referral. Roy walked the parcels over 2 days with a diameter tape and a clinometer, measuring sample plots and estimating board footage. His appraisal came back at $58,000 for the standing timber, mostly red oak, white oak, poplar, and black cherry. The land itself was appraised at $800 per acre on the accessible lots and $400 per acre on the steep ground. Combined land value, $19,500. Total appraised value, $77,500. Wren decided to sell the timber rights on 3 of the parcels, 125 acres of the most accessible ground, and keep the remaining 220 acres as standing forest. The timber buyer, a regional logging company based in Elk View, offered $18,200 for the selective harvest rights. The appraiser's fee was $600. Clyde's title research and filing fees totaled $850. Net proceeds to Wren from the timber sale, $16,750. The silver dollars she took to a coin dealer in Charleston. The dealer examined each coin with a loupe, checked dates and mint marks. He offered $2,150 for the lot. 19 were common dates worth $35 to $50 each. But 4 were scarce: an 1893 S, an 1889 CIC, an 1884 S, and an 1879 CC. The 1893 S alone accounted for $950. Net to Wren, $2,150. The notebook and original deeds had historical value as primary documents of the Elk River timber industry. Clyde connected her with the West Virginia State Archives in Charleston, which offered $1,200 for the notebook and $1,800 for the deeds and map. Net, $3,000. Total value of the satchel's contents, $77,500 in land and timber, $2,150 in silver, $3,000 in archival documents. She kept 220 acres, sold selective timber rights, sold the coins and the documents. She came out with $21,900 in cash, 220 acres of mountain forest, and a clear title to a sawmill she had bought for $10. She started the renovation. The roof came first. The standing seam metal panels were original to the building, tin-coated steel, installed in 1903, rusted through in 11 places where water had been dripping onto the chestnut timbers below for years. She bought 12 sheets of corrugated galvanized steel from a building supply in Charleston and replaced the failed panels, reusing the original screws where possible and drilling new ones where the wood had gone soft. $168 for the steel panels. She borrowed a cordless drill and tin snips from Earl. The floor she addressed next. The concrete in the milling area was cracked but solid. She patched the 3 worst cracks with hydraulic cement. $14 for the cement. The plank decking in the staging area had 4 boards that had rotted through where the roof leaks had dripped on them for decades. She pulled the bad boards and replaced them with rough-cut oak planks from a small portable sawmill operation in Pinch that sold coals and shorts for 40 cents per board foot. $32 for the replacement planks. The walls she tightened the same way she had learned on other buildings, cutting thin strips and nailing them over the gaps as battens. The chestnut boards themselves were sound. American chestnut does not rot, Earl told her. That was the thing about it. The trees were all dead, killed by the blight 90 years ago, but the wood they left behind would outlast everything else in the valley. $28 for batten strips cut from poplar at the mill in Pinch. The sliding door she rehung by cleaning the iron track with a wire brush, lubricating it with white lithium grease, and replacing the 2 broken roller hangers with new ones from the hardware store in Clendenin. $24 for the rollers and grease. The door rolled smoothly for the first time in decades, the iron wheels singing on the track with a low, clean note. The windows, 6 of them, 3 on each long wall, each one a 4-pane industrial sash, she cleaned with vinegar and steel wool. 2 panes were broken. She replaced them with glass cut at the hardware store. $16 for the glass. The electrical she set up with a 200-watt solar panel on the south-facing roof slope, a charge controller, a deep-cycle marine battery, and 12-volt LED lights wired to the ceiling beams. $190 for the complete system. The 6 lights mounted along the center beams made the old chestnut timbers glow like honey. She built a sleeping platform in the lean-to shed, using the log deck framing as a base and adding a plywood top and a railing made from peeled poplar poles. $55 for plywood and hardware. A mattress from Goodwill in Charleston, $30. A canvas tarp hung as a windscreen across the open side of the lean-to, $18. Water came from a hand pump well behind the mill, capped with a rusted iron plate. Earl helped her pull the plate and prime the pump. The water ran clear after 10 minutes, spring-fed from the ridge, cold and clean. She replaced the pump leathers and ran a garden hose to a utility sink on the north wall. $65 for the sink, hose, fittings, and pump parts. The stove was a cast-iron barrel stove, a Birmingham stove and range company model from the 1950s, heavy as an anvil. She cleaned the firebox, replaced the gasket, and ran new stovepipe through the north wall with a proper thimble and rain cap. $38 for the stovepipe, thimble, and gasket. She built Ledger a bed from a wooden shipping crate she found in the lean-to, lined with an old wool blanket from a thrift store in Clendenin. $6 for the blanket. Ledger sniffed the crate. He circled it once. He stepped inside, turned around 3 times, and lay down with his chin on the edge and his mismatched eyes on Wren. And he let out a long breath that carried in it the particular satisfaction of a dog who had finally found a headquarters that met his operational standards. Total renovation, $954. Roof, $168. Floor, $46. Walls, $28. Door, $24. Windows, $16. Solar and electrical, $190. Sleeping platform, $55. Mattress, $30. Tarp, $18. Plumbing, $65. Stove and stovepipe, $38. Dog bed, $6. Miscellaneous hardware, fasteners, and supplies, $270. The community in Clendenin was small and river-built, and carried in its bones the memory of the timber and coal that had made it, and the floods that had nearly unmade it. The people who found their way to the mill came because word travels in a valley the same way water does, downhill, gathering speed, touching everything in its path. Nadine Persinger was 72, a compact woman with curly white hair and bifocals that she wore on a chain around her neck when she wasn't reading, and pushed up onto her forehead when she was, which meant they were almost never in front of her eyes. She ran the Clendenin Public Library in a former bank building on Main Street. 4,200 books, a public computer, and a children's corner with beanbag chairs she had sewn herself. She had a photographic memory for local history. She appeared at the mill on the 3rd day carrying a folder of newspaper clippings about Horace Bowman and a Tupperware of peanut butter fudge. Horace Bowman cut the timber that built half the houses in this town, she said. She set the fudge on the saw table. He wasn't a rich man. He was a steady man. There's a difference most people never learn. What's the difference? Wren asked. A rich man builds a house, Nadine said. A steady man builds a town. She pushed her bifocals up onto her forehead and looked at the chestnut timbers overhead. These beams are the same wood as the beams in the library, same wood as the beams in the Methodist church, same wood as the beams in my grandmother's house. Horace cut them all from the same stand of chestnut on the ridge up there. The trees are gone, but the beams are still holding up every important building in Clendenin. Virgil Hamrick was 68. A retired bridge inspector for the State Highway Department who lived in a double-wide on the riverside of Route 119 and spent his retirement building furniture from reclaimed barnwood. He was a big man, 6'3", with a gray beard trimmed close and thick forearms, and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had spent his career on high steel and had learned that rushing led to falling. He had a habit of standing with his hands in his back pockets and rocking on his heels while he considered what to say, as though the words needed to be load-tested before he let them carry any weight. He came to the mill on the 5th day to look at the sliding door track because Virgil had a professional interest in things that rolled on tracks and could not resist. "That track's hand-forged," Virgil said. He ran his fingers along the iron rail. "You can see the hammer marks. Somebody made this at a forge, not a factory. I'd guess a blacksmith in the valley. There were 3 of them operating in Clendenin in 1903. He rocked on his heels. The thing about hand-forged iron is it's never perfectly straight. It has character. Factory track is straight and it fails all at once. Hand-forged track is a little crooked, and it fails one spot at a time, which means you can fix it one spot at a time, which means it lasts forever if you pay attention. Wren said it sounded like that applied to more than track. Virgil considered this. He rocked on his heels and said most things did. Clyde Farley stopped by the mill regularly during the 6 weeks while the quiet title action worked through the courts, always arriving with his canvas vest and a fresh piece of information. A plat map, a deed reference, a note about the Bowman family from the County Historical Society. He sat on the saw table with his long legs dangling and talked about land the way other people talked about family. "Land doesn't know who owns it," he told Wren. "It just knows what grows on it and what runs through it. The deeds are for us, not for the land. We write them down so we remember what we promised to take care of." Opal Casto was 79, a widow who lived in a white clapboard house on the hill above the mill. Her husband Delbert had built that house in 1968 from lumber cut at Bowman's mill. $186 for 2,400 board feet of rough-cut poplar and oak. The receipt was still in Delbert's desk drawer. She was a thin woman with sharp blue eyes and a posture so upright it looked like a statement of principle. Silver hair and a braid that swung like a pendulum when she walked. She had watched the mill from her kitchen window for 55 years. "That mill has been quiet too long," Opal said. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and Ledger sitting at her feet, his mismatched eyes following her braid back and forth. "A sawmill that isn't cutting is like a church that isn't singing. The building's still there, but the purpose has left it." "Maybe it has a new purpose," Wren said. Opal looked at the sleeping platform and the stove and the solar panel and the dog in the crate. She uncrossed her arms. "Maybe it does. Delbert would have liked that. He always said a building only dies when the last person who cares about it stops coming through the door." The renovation took 12 days. When it was done, the sawmill looked the way Horace Bowman would have understood it, plain and solid, built from materials that did not apologize for what they were. The chestnut timbers held the roof with the same quiet authority they had on the day they were raised. The sliding door rolled on its hand-forged track with a sound like a low note on a steel guitar. The saw rig still sat in the center of the room. Too heavy to move, too much a part of the building to remove. Wren cleaned it, oiled the surfaces, and let it stand as what it was, the heart of the mill, the machine that had turned standing trees into the bones of houses. On clear evenings, Wren would sit on the log deck at the north end of the mill, with her back against the chestnut wall, and watch the sun drop behind the ridge across the Elk River. The water turned from green to copper to black. The valley would go quiet the way mountain valleys do, not silent, but layered. The river underneath the wind, the frogs along the bank, the owls beginning in the trees on the ridge. Ledger would lie beside her with his chin on his paws and his ears in their permanent disagreement, his mismatched eyes watching the far ridge with the patient attention of a dog who was recording the evening the way he recorded everything. Wren thought about Horace Bowman, who had built a sawmill from chestnut timbers and spent 38 years turning trees into lumber and lumber into a town. Who had bought the ridges above his mill one parcel at a time because he understood that the forest was not just raw material, but a resource to be held and passed on. Who had hidden his deeds under 600 pounds of iron and steel because the most important things should be kept close to the work that made them possible. The satchel had sat under the blade housing for 83 years, through the death of its owner and his son and his wife, and the slow quieting of the mill. It had waited in the dark, until a dog with mismatched eyes dug through the sawdust and whined once and looked up at the girl who had walked in with $12 in her pocket. Some things don't get lost. They get stored. They get placed deliberately in the one spot where they'll survive the longest and wait for the person who needs them most. Horace Bowman put his life's records under the blade of his mill, and the mill held them with the quiet, unyielding grip of chestnut wood and cast iron, materials that do not let go of what they're given. The forest grew back on the ridges. The river kept running. And the mill stood on its stone foundation with its blade locked in rust and its secrets buried in sawdust, waiting for a border collie with 2 different colored eyes to dig them up. Ledger found the satchel. Wren opened it. And the sawmill, after 55 years of silence, had someone sleeping under its roof again, listening to the river run in the dark. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Pet Trail Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Every week, Wren finds another forgotten place and gives it a second chance, and you won't want to miss what she discovers next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next trail.